First Edition's Shrubs and Trees, and welcome to a very, very special edition of Garden Gab. This is our first time ever where we bring someone else into the conversation, and I am so excited and honored to introduce you all to Kelly Norris. Kelly is one of the most incredible plantsmen, authors, speakers, garden designers that exists in the world right now. He's also a very dear friend. So I'm very grateful, Kelly, for you for joining us today. We're going to talk about all things Kelly's new book, New Naturalism. I have a couple of copies at home, Kelly, and I've been working my way through both of them, just because I'm taking notes in some and saving the other for a clean copy. But I'm so excited for you to join us and talk about New Naturalism. Kelly uses First Edition's plants in his design work, and so that's why we're here today, to sort of talk about the blend of all of them. So Kelly, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here to chat a little bit.
So can you, in a really quick snapshot, tell everyone what your concept of New Naturalism means?
Well, New Naturalism is, I think, a wide-eyed view of some of the trends that have been afoot in horticulture for some of the last couple of decades, actually. We've seen an increasing interest in native plants. We've seen an increasing interest in looser, wilder planting schemes. And I think people increasingly today, particularly as we come out of a pandemic and people are gardening more and sort of connecting with landscapes and the green spaces around them, are realizing how full of life these places can be. And I think we're starting to feel empowered by that idea that we can create little patchworks of nature and greenness that we can connect through our neighborhoods, our parks, our cities, throughout our region, and what have you, to create a sort of more vibrant, beautiful world to live in and to foster life in. And that's New Naturalism. That's my hope for people in their gardens.
And we see on Instagram all these beautiful, flowing, I'll use your word, diaphanous images that are so inspiring. And like you said, as we're coming from this year of being stuck at home and noticing how structured and hard a lot of our yards have become, because we haven't spent as much time working on them or in them, that now we have this desire to create that beauty again. And your book talks so much about how we can do that, but do that in a responsible way, that it's not just pretty, but it also is ecologically sound.
Yeah, that's right. I think so often people seem to think that nature is a place we have to go away to, like it's a park that we have to take a Sunday afternoon and go see nature, when in fact, really, our gardens are nature. They may have less nature than the park, or maybe they don't, actually, if we lean in for a closer look. I think regardless of the possibilities, nature is really right beyond our doorstep if we lean in for a closer look and plant for that kind of vibrancy. And those things are beautiful too. I have a very conjunctive view of gardening. It's yes and both, not either and or. And we're not trying to wag the finger at people and say, oh, you shouldn't plant that peony, you should replace it with something else instead. We're taking a bigger view of the landscape as a complex habitat that life across all sorts of different levels can thrive, from insects to birds to small mammals and what have you.
So one of the things you talked about that has become an even greater hot topic is the planting of natives and nativars, cultivated native plants. And we don't need to dive into that native conversation, but one of the things that First Editions is really proud of is that we are able to take these cultivated native species plants. So when you're planting in Virginia, or you're planting in South Carolina or Minnesota or Iowa, where Kelly is, or on the West Coast, that there are plants that are regionally appropriate, not only just to survive, but also have that native species in the plant that to make it thrive in that environment too. So I know one of the plants that you and I've used together in projects is Caphalanthus, the button bush. Talk maybe a little bit about the importance of using native plants and nativar, the cultivated native plants, in your design.
Right. We should absolutely be building landscapes from native plant foundations. I mean, those references to place and to our biodynamic and biodiverse natural histories are incredibly important, and that's the foundation from which our gardens should rest, particularly for trees and shrubs, because they live so long in the landscape. They have, the ability to support an incredible amount of life over the course of their existence in our gardens. And so, particularly at those structural plant levels, we absolutely need to be talking about natives, which is great, because companies or brands rather, like First Editions, allow us to connect then that motivation, that desire to do so, with selections that have proven themselves in landscape applications, because across all of the gene pools of any one of these plants exist an enormous amount of traits to be able to survive: cold hardiness, summer tolerance, drought, flood, whatever it is relative to that particular plant. And a plant like Cephalanthus or buttonbush is a great example, because it's a plant a shrub that's found all over the place. I mean, over a huge swath of North America. And thus it's adapted to growing in cold places and hot places and sort of everywhere in between. A selection like fiber optics brings that ability of that gene pool to respond to those dynamics of environment and place into a plant that fits into landscapes, into modern landscapes. Fiber optics, keeps a really nice kind of more orderly habit in comparison to the wild types of that plant. But that's just one example of how those selections allow us to be able to fit those plants into landscapes, sometimes which are not very big, of course. Most people out there don't have big landscapes. So we have to think about the footprint and how we start to bring pieces of that natural history into our garden in a way that fits the horticultural frame.
So as you approach design in your design work, how do you place shrubs and trees into it, and how does that interplay with all of the other pieces of the garden? I know that in your book you talk a lot about matrix structure in the vignette. So how do the First Editions followers, as they're planning their home gardens, build that structural component in?
So you mentioned the kind of the three layers I think about when I'm designing, and it's an archetype that I've developed over many years from both my time spent in wild places and in gardens as well, because it's sort of the simplest possible way to think about the layered dynamics of a landscape. That sort of, the matrix, that functional layer, the structural layer, which we'll talk about here, which kind of gives the frame to things, and then the sort of vignettes, which are kind of the content within the frames. Those are the pretty pictures that we save on Instagram and Pinterest, and the sorts of things that drive us florally, et cetera. But structural elements that sort of make that frame inside the landscape are really important. Now, in cities or in suburbs or subdivisions or what have you, sometimes that structure is built. It's a property fence, it's a house, it's the shadow of another building or something like that. But inside the landscape, we can think of plants that provide a little bit of an architectural framework to be able to garden within. And, we have, obviously in First Editions, there's a number of great shrubs. I have to get in my love for cobalt and gold. It's the hypericum that's in the collection. It's just an absolutely versatile, useful, functional plant, and is so geometric and is so tidy and so orderly. It's just a beautiful sort of orb-like plant that has this excellent aquamarine foliage and yellow flowers in the late summer. It's a plant I use a lot in my designs because you can use it as a sort of geometric element that then provides a little legible form around which looser grasses or other things can kind of play. And so I'm always using structural plants like that to kind of to create some order around things, because our eyes and our brains need just a little bit of legibility. We have to be able to see kind of some sense of pattern or shape or framework to be able to sometimes to make sense of these more wilder natural plantings.
So what are some of your favorite types of plants to use to create that structure? There within that shrub and tree category, of course, there's such a broad range. What are some that you've used that are great places to start?
Yeah. Well, I think, in a small landscape, sometimes we don't always have the chance to plant trees. That's already done for us. If you bought a new home in a subdivision, and chances are the street trees have already been planted. So, you may be looking at a structural planting palette as mostly being about shrubs. And so, there's so many shapes in shrubs. There's kind of low growing, sort of low to the ground, almost ground hugging shapes. I think
Jade Parade.
Yes, I was just about to say Jade Parade. That's a great example of something that's a plant that's native to sand dunes and to sort of edge-like environments like that, where it's growing maybe on a little hill and it can kind of scramble down and hold the sloper. But then, there's the sort of things like the hypericums or the nine barks that are more shapelier sort of shrubs in that 3 to 5 foot, broadly speaking, range, tall and wide, that kind of fit that middle ground, that kind of, rounded, soft sort of shape. And then, as we work up even to maybe a small tree like our famous tiger eye sumac, of course. I mean, which gives that kind of that almost muscular kind of armature. I mean, it just sort of looks rugged and looks tough. And in the Midwest here, that fits that sort of prairie aesthetic. But of course, there's sumacs all over the whole continent, and so they look right in a lot of places. They look just as good out even on the coast too, because you see sumacs oftentimes in those kinds of shoreline conditions too. So it's trying to match a little bit the shapes and the forms of these shrubs to the place that they look right, that they sort of fit into the context of what the vegetation in that part of the world seems to be.
A couple of years ago, Kelly and I were on vacation together, and we were walking down the street. And traveling with Kelly is such a delight because I just learn so much anytime I'm anywhere with him. And we also
lots of stopping to look at plants. Lots of stopping to look at
lots of stopping. But we were walking down, and we looked down, and there was like almost a little alleyway garden, and there was tiger eye sumac.
There was. I mean, and the beautiful thing about tiger eyes is that sumacs are suckering shrubs, of course, and so you can sort of shape them into whatever you want. There's a real opportunity as a gardener to sort of get creative and kind of make something almost out of them. They can be kind of almost tree-like and kind of be dancing up with just a few trunks, or sometimes they can be, much more low and broad and have much more branching and almost act as like a big shrub. So I like plants like that because they're tough. That suckering ability says something about how they adapt to place, but they also allow us to have fun with them in the garden too.
So Kelly, if there's one or two things that you want people to take from New Naturalism, what is it that is the most important lesson that those of us that read the book can walk away with?
Well, I want people to understand plants. That's my lifelong hope, is that through some means of storytelling and teaching and little things like this, we can help to shine a light on the fact that plants are alive. They're not furniture. They're not just static objects to move around. Like, they're alive. They have roots in place. They're grounded, quite literally, in the reality that we may dig a hole and enter them in, but they're alive in that place. And so we have to understand something about that, because that means that unlike our chair or our favorite couch in the living room, they're changing and evolving and growing. And that's something that we have to be so aware of, and how they're doing that and why they grow the way they do and all of those things. And we see those things as gardeners. We're very curious people out there when we're on our hands and knees and we're sweating, we're pulling weeds, and we're happy because we're just grateful to have our hands in the dirt. We're seeing those things. And so you don't need a plant biology degree to start to figure out, understand plants. You can start to see some things and then connect them to some of the lessons that are in that first chapter of the book. The second thing I want people to take away is to really get back to a sense of place. We have more information at our fingertips today about native plants, about wild plant communities, about things that inspire us. I mean, if we've learned anything about the last year, it's that we can now be as connected. The world is as small as it has ever possibly been, because we have so much information. And sometimes it can be hard to find information. It can be hard to navigate that universe of possibilities out there. But because of that universe of possibilities, we can get even closer to what our places actually mean. Not only what they might have once been, but what they could be again if we'd lean in and be more curious, as opposed to simply thinking about the garden as a painting that we just draw out on or paint out in the landscape. It's more than that. It's alive. It's changing. It's a part of our lives that we should welcome and encourage, because we get to be part of a greater sort of natural universe in the process.
And thank you for that perspective. It's inspired us. We've started just to tell more stories around plants and where they come from, and we'll have a lot more this year, because it is important, and it's fun to know. It's good, cocktail party conversation when you've got people over, once we can get back out and have people in the garden again. But it's also important to know that what you're putting in the ground is beneficial, not only, again, aesthetically, but for the insects that are in the space, for the soil. So I'm grateful that you continue to bring that conversation to the forefront. So I can't let you go without asking, and you maybe already answered it a little bit, but your favorite one or two plants that you use, maybe here in the Upper Midwest where we live, but in other places of the country too. What is your favorite FE plant?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of Hypericum, Calmeanum, Cobalt, and Gold. What an outstanding selection! The best in the market, frankly. I've tried many of them. I mean, I've grown many of them, but really the best in the market in terms of its vigor and durability and performance. This is a species actually that is not that broadly distributed. It has a very kind of narrow, unique range. It's really native to sand dunes and river valleys and the Great Lakes area, and kind of a little farther to the south. It has a sort of strange distribution. You wouldn't think a plant that was kind of so relatively rare in the wild can actually be so broadly adaptable. But it reminds us that sometimes we just don't know all the answers, and plants surprise us sometimes. And so Cobalt and Gold has just been an outstanding plant. I mentioned earlier, it's sort of nice, orderly, tidy habit. Blue-green foliage, yellow flowers, pollinator magnet, gets great fall color. I mean, it's just every season it's there doing something and looking so great. I'm also really excited about Iceberg Alley, which is this selection of Salix candida, a willow from way far north. I mean, a Canadian willow species in a lot of ways, but a willow that does get into northern parts of the U.S. as well too. And this selection that you all put out is just outstanding. Pewtery silver foliage, low growing, not going to get huge necessarily. And of course, the best part about willows is if they get too big, you can just whack them and cut them back, and they'll sort of take on the direction that you want them to go, because they're very amenable to pruning. So I'm really thrilled about both of those. I think they represent some glimmers of new ideas for how to bring great plants to great gardeners all over the country.
Well, thank you for that. I love those both as well. And I bought a new house this winter, and so I've got some land that was freshly cleaned up. So there's not a plant in the ground other than established trees. So I've been using Kelly's book for some inspiration as I plan out the gardens. As soon as the snow leaves us in Minnesota, what I'm going to put in the ground, and both of those are going to make their way in. So Kelly, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For all of you watching, check out New Naturalism, kellydnorris.com, or Instagram, Kelly D. Norris as well. Grab his book. It's so good, and it's beautiful. The photographs are absolutely stunning and inspirational as well. So thank you, Kelly. You'll probably see Kelly a couple more times throughout the year on our videos, and maybe some photos if we can get out to his yard one of these days.
Yes.
Thank you. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next time on Garden Gab.